My name is Antonio HaileSelassie. I support the agency for Section 508, provide technical guidance. The session's on electronic content and documents. What we're going to do is kind of give you an overview of electronic documents, why we have to make them compliant, talk about some best practices, and then give you a demonstration of how to put those best practices into action. So what is Section 508? In 1998, Congress amended the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 to include Section 508, which provides people with disabilities opportunities to gain meaningful employment with the federal government and to reflect the focus on technology. We also have a Section 508 policy, NPR 2800.2, which you can just go online and take a look at. And what that does is it provides guidance on what key stakeholders are responsible for. In addition to that, kind of clarifies some of the issues or problems that we may have had in the past with Section 508 and some of the gray areas. So why electronic documents? Why do we have to make electronic documents accessible? The Access Board's Technical Standard 1194.22, Web-Based Intranet and Internet Information and Application, applies to electronic documents at the point that they are distributed over an internet or over an intranet or the internet to the public or federal employees via NASA external or internal websites, FTP, HTTP, etc., email, file sharing, SharePoint or other document management system, or other electronic means. For a long time, people would say, email doesn't have to be Section 508 compliant, or if I send a PDF over email, we don't have to make that compliant. It only needs to be compliant if we put it on our website. Well, that's not true. The standard itself is titled Web-Based Intranet and Internet Information and Applications, and certainly email and electronic documents would fall into that category. Electronic documents created and stored for individual use are not required to comply with Section 508 accessibility standards. So if you created a document for yourself to view, or you just have it stored on your computer, also anything stored for archival purposes would not have to comply. Sure, please ask your question.
Archival purposes, personal archival purposes, or can you say that you have created XYZ document, placed it on the web, and stored it there for
No,
archival?
not if it's available through the web, but if it's stored, say for example you have a server and you're just keeping documents in the server, sure you may access them later, but if you're just storing them in some server somewhere, but they're not displayed online, or you're not sending them through the email or anything like that, then those don't need to be compliant. But when you're sending them, displaying them, presenting them in some way, they would have to comply with Section 508. Common examples: email, spreadsheets, word processing documents, portable document format or PDF, commercial office document suites like Microsoft Office, Open Office, Google Docs, Star Office, Lotus, etc. Things like Excel, even this PowerPoint needs to be accessible if I were to distribute it. Again, leaving it right here on my computer, and I'm just using it to show you and display to you, it doesn't need to be Section 508 compliant. But when I post them on the web, if I send it to you via email, it needs to be Section 508 compliant. As far as our policy, as I said earlier, our policy kind of gave a little more information on some of those gray areas. And as I said when I first got here, there were some issues with electronic documents and some confusion. Our policy actually clarifies that. So, 2.3.1.1, official communication shall be made accessible to persons with disabilities. Official communication refers specifically to communication by a federal agency to employees that contain information necessary for those employees to perform their job functions, or communication by a federal agency to members of the general public that contains information necessary for the conduct of official business with the agency. Examples of such electronic content may include email messages, Word documents, PDF documents, and other types and formats. So for example, I got an email that says to come to the OCIO's Christmas party. Now, does that need to be Section 508 compliant?
Yes.
Because the important thing here is it doesn't contain information necessary for me to perform my job duties. It'd be good if it was Section 508 compliant, but I don't. If I go to the Christmas party or don't go to the Christmas party, I can still perform my job. But if I send a communication saying Antonio, or if send a communication saying we have a meeting at, in the auditorium, or there's some type of conference going on, that would need to be Section 508 compliant, because that is part of my job duties. Continuing with the policy, 2.3.1.2, broadcast emails and emails generated by web applications will comply with the applicable Section 508 technical standards. Broadcast emails, as defined in the standard, are those emails, just to go back, it says emails generated by web applications. So for example, there's a lot of mail applications that send out automated emails. There's a lot of applications that actually produce PDF documents, for example. That would be included here. So broadcast emails, as defined in the standard, are those emails sent by a NASA civil servant, contractor, or appointee to any group or list comprised of persons, some of whom are not personally known to the sender. And I want to make a comment on that. I get a lot of times where people say, hey, I'm just sending it to my team. I'm sending an email to my team of 4 or 5 people. And I'm just saying, and none of them are disabled. Do I need to make that Section 508 compliant? Any answers for that? Do you need to make that Section 508 compliant? You know none of them are disabled. Absolutely. You need to make that Section 508 compliant because you don't know if all of your group is not disabled. We talked earlier in the awareness training about colorblindness or other disabilities that people don't disclose. You may not even realize that someone in your own team is disabled in some way. And they don't have to tell you. But you do need to provide accessible technology to them, accessible documents, accessible information. As final documents intended for distribution to other federal employees or to members of the public seeking information and services. And electronic documents, as we said, this is in the policy, electronic documents created and stored on individual workstations are not required to comply with Section 508 accessibility standards. So, documents, it sounds scary. That means you're probably listening to me and saying, my goodness, I have all these emails that I send out every day. I don't even know if they're accessible or not. Or I have PDFs. I send a ton of PDFs just yesterday to my group, or I sent some PDFs, or I sent some Word documents to the center. When he does his communication to let you know when these slides are going to be available or when the videos are going to be available, he's got to send a Section 508 compliant document to you. So it's a little scary at first when you hear that. But let me let you know, creating accessible documents is not very complicated. It's not very difficult. You just got to follow a few best practices. All right. So first, we're going to place content in a logical reading order. Keep it very simple. Avoid complex layouts, sidebars, other ornamentation when possible, as they make it difficult to maintain a logical reading order. And we say here when possible, simply because there are times where you may need to produce a complex document. But if you're sending an email or you're sending something simple, just keep it simple. Avoid embedded multimedia. Again, most document production software does not necessarily allow for multimedia, but there are some that do. So if used, all embedded multimedia would need synchronized captions and audio descriptions. Use style elements to format your document. For example, use style elements to create headers and place the headers in a logical and consistent or incremental reading order. For example, a document should not jump from a heading 1 to a heading 4. This is not necessarily a Section 508 standard, but it's just accessibility, simple accessibility. Okay? So it's a best practice that we've put in here. Use the native application styling functions for bulleting, numbering, pre-formatted lists as a tool to make your list accessible. I'm sure everybody knows what a list is. You have those dots, or you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Instead of using one parentheses or one period, and then you type it out, instead of doing that, go ahead and use, for example, Word's tools for making lists. That way, when someone using assistive technology comes across that list, they know that it's a list. They even can programmatically determine what level it is. Because sometimes if you have, for example, an outline of some sort, you have levels of 1, then you have A, B, C. Well, actually, you can the assistive technology can sometimes programmatically determine what level that is, as opposed to just typing it out. All right. Ensure all images and other non-text elements, for example, graphs, illustrations, images of data tables, clip art, audio and video, etc., have alternate text. Any image, picture of a chart, table, graph, text, or other non-text element must be fully described textually. Charts and tables must be described in greater detail, which means including numbers and what those numbers represent. For basic images, do not overcomplicate the description and only provide the information necessary to explain the main purpose of the image and the context of the image. One thing is important to note: whenever you're doing alternate text, you want your alternate text to be succinct. Basically, you want to get your point across with your alternate text. Even if it's a chart or graph, if you have a specific point that you're trying to get across with your chart or graph, like for example, I was doing some PDFs. I mentioned this a bit earlier. And on those PDFs, I'm getting all these charts and graphs, and I'm having to type in alternate text for all of these numbers and all of this information, the y-axis, the x-axis, and all these data points, and it gets very complicated and time-consuming. When in actuality, these scientists or other people or these experts are simply trying to get a very simple point across. I ran across one where I could actually infer what the point was, which was to simply show a progression from, say, for example, 1% to 10% over a certain number of years. So whatever the title of the graph was, maybe it was sales, for example, and they went from 1990 to 2000, their sales increased by 10%. Well, that's the simple point they were trying to get across, so there's no point for me to put data points for 1990, 1%, for 1991, 2%, 1992, 4% or 5%. Now, if that data is important to what you're trying to get across, if you're trying to show some type of data sets, then yes, you need alternate text that gives all of that information. But if you're just trying to get a simple point across with a graph or visual of some sort, give alternate text that's equivalent to that. All right, embedding audio and video should be avoided, but if needed, textual equivalents, for example, transcripts, text descriptions, or links to textual equivalents should be provided. Again, there's a distinction here. This is not audio and video. This is audio or video. If you have audio, it needs a transcript. If you have video, some type of text description should be fine. Images and other non-text elements that are strictly decorative are not required to have alternate text. In our demonstration, I'll give you an example of that. Avoid using tables for layout. Everybody knows what a table is, and for example, Word, where you're using it for layout instead of data. Has anybody seen that? Most times they use it for like forms or information. It's just to kind of organize it. You want to avoid that. But, because Word and other applications have pretty good features to be able to space things out equally. But if you're going to use a table, that's fine. Just use the table. But keep in mind that screen readers and Braille displays read tables row by row, left to right. So make sure you organize your information going in that order, row by row, left to right, because it's going to read row by row, left to right. So if you have information that you're intending to go straight down in one column and straight down in another column, the assistive technology is not going to read in that direction. So just remember, if you're going to use layout tables, organize it in that order. Organize your information in that order. All right, for data tables, make sure all column and row headers are clearly identifiable. Applications like Acrobat. Acrobat has pretty extensive accessibility features to it. It even allows you to add tags and information there. So you can actually describe that, hey, this set of information, this is a header. This is a table header. Word and applications like Word don't necessarily have that ability. So what you're going to use some type of differential styling to identify headers. And actually, Word does have a means to define your headers, column headers, but many software do not. You can create a unique style called table header. Or at the very least, use bold or some type of larger font, at the very least. This helps readers to distinguish headers from data in the table. Note there is a technical standard requiring markup to be used to associate data cells with header cells, with complex headers. That means 2 or more logical levels of headers. Not really possible with some document development tools. So when possible, try to keep it to a single row of table headers or a single column of row headers. When possible, again, you always go with what you're required to do or what you need first. Just recognize that it may need some accessibility remediation when you're finished. Do not use tab, spacebar, or enter keys to format tables, columns, lists, etc. Similar to what we were talking about earlier. Use your built-in features. For example, adjust your margins, adjust your paragraph spacing. You can use insert table to encode semantic structures for content like headings, paragraphs, lists, sections, headers, footers, tables. Has anyone used Word's draw feature? There's a draw table feature. So it says draw table, and you actually take a pencil and draw out a table. And you draw lines in a table.
Maybe once ever.
Yeah, great. Keep it that way.
Okay.
We don't want to use that. We don't want to draw a table because there's no way to programmatically tell what you've drawn. It's literally a drawing. But if you're using the insert table feature, and I know what you're referring to, where there's a drag and you can choose the number of columns, and that is fine. And actually, I'll show that as well later. That's fine. But draw feature, also there's the draw table, you can actually delete or erase lines. That changes the structure of the table itself. It would be better to use functions like merge cells or delete cells, and that's all available. If you know anything about creating documents, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, use standard fonts. Do not use fonts that do not map to Unicode. I had the question earlier, what is Unicode? It's actually pretty simple. Like, for example, the letter M, there's this little code that goes with the letter M that the computer reads or recognizes, or the letter F or the letter O. They all have codes to them. And that goes back to the operating system, and it figures out what you're doing, what you're trying to get across, the information you're trying to provide. Some fonts do not map to Unicode. Your standard fonts with most of your applications or that come with your computer should be fine. You should pretty much use any of those. But if you're downloading fonts or adding fonts, or you're trying to get these really pretty, unique fonts, wherever you're downloading from, just check to make sure that it maps to Unicode. That information should be given somewhere, hopefully. Avoid placing content in drawing canvases or text boxes. Doesn't mean don't do them, but if you use these text boxes or drawing canvases, they often fall to the bottom of the reading order for some reason. They're treated like floating objects, so they kind of float on. There may be layers to the document, and it floats on the top layer or the bottom layer, and it'll fall to the top or bottom of the reading order. So if you have a text box that visually, to us, shows up in the center of the page, it may not read that way. So avoid them, but don't eliminate them, and there's really not much you can do in Word, for example, to adjust the reading order. If you were to then convert it to a PDF, there is the ability PDF or HTML, there is the ability to change the reading order there. All right. Hyperlinks should contain the correct hyperlink and display the full qualified URL. This is just in case it doesn't provide the correct hyperlink, or doesn't hyperlink at all. In some cases, you'll send an email, you'll put a hyperlink in, and I've gotten emails where the hyperlink for some reason disappears. And then all I see is a click here. Or maybe I'll see part of the URL itself. And I'm clicking here, and there's no hyperlink. So this is not a Section 508 standard, but this is for good accessibility. This is just good usability, accessibility. Just provide, instead of nasa.gov or click here, http www.nasa.gov. Ensure that color is not, and I put that in red, bold on purpose, the sole means of conveying information. The reason I did that because red is not the sole means I'm conveying information. That's just red text. So color highlighting can be used for markup, but should not be the only way to provide information. For example, you can use red text within a document to highlight specific information. Or you can use highlighters or whatever you want to use, blue, green, whatever. But if you direct a reader to, for example, follow the instructions in red, this information, the red information, may not be discernible to an individual with color blindness or blindness. In this case, it would be better to enclose the specified text using textual notations, such as an asterisk or brackets, and direct users to follow the directions enclosed in brackets or with the asterisk, for example. Use a high contrast between background colors and text colors. An individual with low vision or color blindness may not be able to read text that does not have a high degree of contrast between text and background. Use light text on dark backgrounds and dark text on light backgrounds. Don't use light gray on dark gray, because most likely it'll be very hard. It's hard for me to see. I'm going to quickly go over these resources here. section508.nasa.gov or www.nasa.gov/accessibility. You have general and NASA-specific information and resources there. It's an excellent website. We have a bunch of how-tos and guides there for NASA employees and contractors. Also, NASA Virtual Help Desk, Section 508 help@nasa.gov. That'll get an email to me or our team, the agency 508 coordinator. So if you have any questions or concerns, again, Doug Pearson here is your Section 508 coordinator at the center. So your first line of defense is Doug. Doug is increasingly knowledgeable. So, so he should be able to help you with much of what you're looking for. If he can't help, he'll probably contact us as well, and we'll help you as well. www.section508.nasa.gov, also the access-board.gov, access-board.gov. Those will provide you information on the technical standards and Section 508 law in general. All right, now we have a demonstration for you guys. Okay, this is a document I just pulled off of nasa.gov, did a search for it. I figured I'd find a document that someone has used, that we've used before. NASA Office of Earth Sciences Application Program. I'm guessing this was written in 2008 at some point. If you look here, most of this is text, very simple text. If you have text, there's really nothing you need to do with that. Just make sure it's in an organized, readable format. Again, this is Word. I'm using Word 2007 here for my editing. Now you look here, we have a couple of images. We have an image of a NASA logo, and we also have an image of the Earth. All right? Now we're going to take a look. I'm going to do the Earth first, and I'll explain why in a second. But let's take a look. We're going to hit right-click on the Earth, and it brings up a sub-menu. And if you look at the bottom, we have Format Picture. We're going to click Format Picture, and if you look, we have a couple of options, and alt text is the last one here. We have a tab for alt text. You can simply add alternate text that says, image of Earth. And we're going to click OK. And that image now has alternate text. Very simple, took us a couple of seconds. Image of Earth. Sometimes it shows up in Word. It's not showing up now for me for some reason. I think because the issue with this particular image, I believe what happened when they created this document is they brought it over from an older version of Word. And I'm going to explain why I think that. It is. That's how I saved it. So you would think that it should work the same. But that image is a little bit different. And this is how it's different. The newest version of Word, or the newer versions, I think 2003 and 2007, actually moved where you input the alt text. And I don't know why they moved it where they moved it. I'm going to right-click on this NASA logo. And normally, in the older versions, I would just go to Format Picture. And there should be a tab here that says alt text. It's not there. It's nowhere to be found. Well, let's try this again. I'm going to right-click and insert caption, text wrapping. I mean, you would think insert caption might work. It's actually under size. Now, who would guess size? I mean, if you're new to Word or you haven't used Word before and someone tells you put alternate text in your graphic, you say, okay, I'm just going to go back to my computer. I'm going to right-click on it. I should be able to find it just fine. Who thinks to look on the size? But that's where it is. So you guys know. You can go back and tell others it's under size. Your tab for alt text, you add your alt text. There's actually some alt text already here. Usually if somebody copies and pastes it, say from the internet, it just drag over some information and it's just not accurate. So we're just going to put NASA logo. Now, someone in one of the earlier sessions pointed out that, hey, wait a minute, this image of the Earth, that's just decoration. Even the logo can be considered decoration. Well, I'm the author in this case, secondary author. And I'm going to choose that for now, that is a valid image. I want you to know that there's an image of the Earth on there. I'm adding alternate text. If you decide that that's just decoration, has no value to your document, you can certainly remove the alternate text or not put alternate text in at all. That is your discretion because decoration does not need decoration. Images used for decoration do not need alternate text. I do go by the general rule that if it has text on it, repeat the text at the very least. So if I see NASA, I'm generally going to put the text NASA. But again, it could be considered decoration. There have been times where a NASA logo on a PowerPoint presentation is repeated throughout the document on every single page. What I generally do is on the first page, I'll put alternate text on the initial logo that says, NASA logo, and then I'll make a notation repeated on every page. And then every other subsequent page, I'm not going to put alternate text. Because a screen reader doesn't necessarily, a person using a screen reader doesn't want to hear NASA logo or every decoration, image used for decoration. They don't want to hear that on every single page. So